My colleague Annelise Nielsen was in the news conference. Annelise there at the White House, and she joins us live. This is an extraordinary moment in US foreign policy in the Middle East. This is quite the moment. Can you give our viewers a sense of what it was like there in the White House when this was announced and what the reaction was, the questioning, but also importantly, the following on the statements from Donald Trump as he sought to explain, elaborate and justify this announcement?
Well, look, Donald Trump had all the big dogs there with him. He had his Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, the Vice President was there, J.D. Vance as well. And this really had the hallmarks of being a well-planned announcement. And I know some people are going to disagree with me on that, that maybe he spoke with hyperbole or he didn't actually mean to say that he intends for the US to own that part of the world. And I think there is some truth to that as well. I think that potentially what he would be looking at is Israeli territory there, that they have private investments in. It's notable this came the day after he announced the US was going to start a sovereign wealth fund. And that would certainly put themselves in competition with some other big sovereign wealth funds in that part of the world. But I think what we're looking at here is Donald Trump shaking things up before the second phase of the ceasefire deal negotiations. And I think that's critical here when he says, oh, we're going to relocate everyone from Gaza to other wealthy Arab nations in the area because they'll surely want to move. Of course, people have wanted to get out of Gaza over the last year and a bit. Of course, there would be people that want to leave and would resettle. It's the actual countries in that region that won't take them, that won't open the border to Egypt. That is what he's putting on the table, saying, we're going to go back to the basics of this. Why aren't you guys taking this? And it's completely reshaping the negotiation there. And I think my interpretation of it, I'm certainly not an expert in Middle East politics, but I've been watching US politics for quite some time, and this is how Donald Trump does it. He resets the negotiating parameters to suit himself. He wants everyone to be unsure of what he's going to say next. He wants to throw in things that no one expected to reframe the discussion and likely end up back somewhere where he originally wanted, but probably not quite what he's announced today.
Yes, okay, so we shouldn't expect necessarily boots on the ground and a for real takeover and a redevelopment as articulated. Do you think that this is really more a tactic in terms of trying to make progress in the negotiations, Annelise?
Well, look, I don't know. No one really knows. And that's also the power that Donald Trump wields right now. And this is how he is establishing his power in the world. I mean, the fact that the ceasefire deal and hostages started being swapped the day before Inauguration Day is exactly the influence he wants to assert and maintain. The fact that we're talking about this three-phase deal, the fact that he's already fielding questions about what he's going to do about Ukraine. He wants a win. And in particular, he's got his eye on oil prices. He wants gas prices to come down. That's why there was such a specific carve out with the tariffs with Canada. They're really worried about that. They know that there's a certain amount that people will tolerate their gas going up before it becomes the major news story in America. And right now, everyone's talking about eggs here being so expensive. But this is something he absolutely has his eye on. And so, look, I don't know. I can't say that he's completely making this up as a negotiating tactic. But we know from how he's acted in the past, the art of the deal, this is how he negotiates. He resets the parameters to suit himself because he doesn't want the other party setting the negotiating parameters.
And as you put it before, and that resonated with me, that he would get back to the focus that he had in the first place. Consistent with that, this would be quite counter to a lot of, if he were to take it over and have this adventurism in the Middle East, it would be counter to what he'd said previously, that he wanted to end the forever wars. He didn't want to be caught up in quagmires in the Middle East militarily, that he was America first. This is the most ancient of quagmires if he were to do this.
Yeah, I heard Chris Ullman before say it's the longest forever war, and that's certainly what a lot of people watching that part of the world, how they feel. But I think you're absolutely right. He said time and time again at his rallies, I've heard it so many times myself, I'm the only president that no new wars started during my tenure. I'm not going to send our kids overseas to get killed in foreign wars where there's nothing to gain. And the thing that really changes the conversation about that in the US is the fact that there are still hostages, that there were hostages kept there. And just the fact that this has gone on in such a brutal manner for so long, there is a general popular will that this needs to come to an end. There needs to be some kind of resolution to all this. And there's a lot of popular support for Israel as well in the US. And so especially among Republicans, everyone wants to see something bring this to an end. And so I think this was him throwing out the most outlandish thing he could. But at the same time, he's not shying away from territorial expansion. He's talked about taking on Greenland. He's joked about taking on Canada. And I know that's mostly a joke, but I think there's also an element of who's keeping an eye on where the world's oil reserves are. And then there's also the strategic security element to all this, because the US has been weakened in its security stance in the Middle East since it lost Bagram during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That is something that's front of mind for a lot of intelligence analysts around that part of the world. And there would be a sense of anything that they can do to have a stronger foothold in that region, and anything they could do to expand that kind of scope of having that intelligence service there would be welcome. But at the same time, can you imagine what the Egyptians are saying right now, thinking that they're going to have a US territory on their doorstep? They're not going to be happy about it. So this is him throwing the gauntlet down, saying, I can do this. Try and stop me. What do you want to do to stop me?
Yeah, I would also, absolutely. Very interesting point there about the reaction in the Middle East. I'm also quite intrigued about what our government's going to do in terms of its response when they've argued so strongly. And both sides of politics, to be fair, have said there needs to be a two-state solution. There was no reference to Palestinian sovereignty in any of what Donald Trump said. He said it was a long-term ownership that he envisaged. And just to go back to what Annelise was saying on the ceasefire, and is this about firming up his and Israeli position in terms of implementing that ceasefire? Let's play what Donald Trump said on that. And we'll get back to Annelise.
I'm hopeful that this ceasefire could be the beginning of a larger and more enduring peace that will end the bloodshed and killing once and for all. With the same goal in mind, my administration has been moving quickly to restore trust in the alliance and rebuild American strength throughout the region. And we've really done that. We're a respected nation again.
Yeah, so he wants to see peace. It's been elusive there, Annelise, for so long. We wait to see what the reaction is, because it's going to be reaction both in those negotiations and to get that ceasefire in the short term. But as you know, there will be reverberations throughout the United Nations, around the world, including here at Parliament House in Canberra, Annelise.
Absolutely, and we saw the executive orders today as well. And he's not mucking around with Iran, and they do know that there were Iranian connections to the threats on his life. And so this is something he takes very seriously. And I think the other aspect to all this that we need to kind of keep in mind is this is him establishing himself domestically as well for the second Trump administration. There's a lot of goodwill for Donald Trump right now, and he wants America to look again like the authority on the global stage that it once was, and has quite frankly been weakened over the last few years. And it has been seen as like America doesn't have the standing that it once did, and that's what kept the world safe. And so there is a lot of popular support among his own supporters here for him to be throwing his weight around on things like this. For the repercussions for Australia, we're still very much seen as just the lighthouse in the Indo-Pacific. We're very much seen as the reliable allies there. We don't have our head above the parapet when it comes to tariffs at the moment because of the US surplus with Australia. And so I couldn't imagine that there'd be any kind of repercussions at a presidential level, but you can imagine when we start getting to state-to-state level, when we were expecting Richard Marles here, the Defence Minister in Washington, D.C. this Friday to meet with Peter Hegseth. They're not going to be mucking around when it comes to conversations about what is happening in this region, and Australia's Conversations around the Middle East. I know it's been notable about the ICC warrant against Netanyahu and our conversation around that we kind of avoided talking about it instead of saying that it was, as the US said, that it was completely unreasonable and they weren't going to even entertain the prospect. But when it comes to what the US is going to do next year, I think they are laser focused on all of the hostages. And you have some of the most influential members of Congress. John Fetterman has photos of every single hostage up on his wall that he doesn't take down until they're returned home. This is a popular issue in the US, and Donald Trump wants to bring it to a resolution.
Annelise, we will stay in touch and talk to you soon.